Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassey, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. And today we have a guy here who is someone who I have admired since I was old enough to read. One of the first editors I ever read in Ocean City, G. Williams. Welcome, G.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here. It's a real pleasure.
Now, you're a newspaper guy.
Yes, always.
But you've done some amazing stuff. You actually got into politics, and you're the mayor of everyone's favorite small town, Berlin, Maryland.
Well, I don't know if it's everybody's favorite, but it's definitely the coolest, and I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
So what's it like to go from journalism, from community journalism, doing exactly what I'm doing, is what you made a career out of with many different newspapers that you were in charge of. And now you get to run things in a really cool little town. What's that like?
Well, now I'll find out if all that experience of watching others do some good things and
Right.
some things that I didn't agree with, now I'm getting a chance to find out if I learned anything from that experience. And it's so funny, when I look back and how much of my life I have spent in the council chambers of the Berlin Town Hall. In 1971, right after I graduated from the University of Maryland College Park and got my journalism degree.
Which is where I went to school.
Yeah, go Terps. And I started covering Berlin Council in the late spring, early summer, 1971.
John Howard Burbage
And
was the mayor.
And what a great role model. He and Harry Kelly. We talk about two folks with a lot of character.
My heroes.
And they were great to work with. They told it like it was, and that was great for a young journalist. But it's interesting when I look back on it now, most of the Monday nights of my life has been spent in the Berlin Council chambers since 1971. 30 of those years as a journalist. A few years was a transition. In fact, I guess it was about more like, it was more than 30 years. Anyway, we won't get into that. But for the last 10, I guess it's now, 2000. Wow. The last 10 years, I've been there as an elected official, first as a council member and the last 8 as a mayor. And it's interesting because I think that those folks were always very open with me. They didn't just tell me, the answer to the question. As often I would say, well, why?
Right.
And I always appreciate the fact that to the best that they could, they tried to make me understand the circumstances. And I think that's been of great value.
Yeah. I mean, and that was a great council to cover. I mean, they were animated more years than others. I remember when Paula Lynch got on there, it was a lot of controversy from time to time.
Oh, I love working with Paula. Paula, she was there until just 2 years ago.
Right, and she was certainly one of the smartest people there, which was interesting, and she spoke her mind. But it was a very interesting dynamic on that council. As a reporter, I was always over at the Ocean City meeting. Which
the more high-profile one.
Yeah, but even that could be pretty boisterous at times. But the thing I remember most about it was we missed an awful lot of Monday Night Football because we had to go to those meetings.
We're doing a little better on that now. I think it's because we're all older, so we get home a little earlier. but it's
the Berlin meeting used to go to like 2 in the morning sometimes.
It was and council members Burrell and vice president council member Elroy Brittingham. They went through that, and I was in the audience, but sometimes I could leave as a journalist, but they couldn't. And I think everyone thinks it's not a debating society. It's a decision-making body. And you can always fix a decision you make, but you can never fix one you never make.
After your newspaper career, you went into public relations for the state, with the State Highway Administration, and you were the best ever guy to work with because you knew what we needed, when we needed it, why we needed it. And you didn't put up walls. You were just so cooperative and helpful. And you worked for a great, dynamic, fun guy, Donnie Drewer.
Absolutely.
What a character. What a great guy.
Donnie's one of those few people in life that I can honestly say maybe as close to irreplaceable as you'll find. And I'm sure they'll find a good man, but they're going to find it very hard to find as good a man as Donnie.
He's a district engineer for the State Highway. And so basically everything that's been built on the shore in the last 40 years
I would. He started working in the '60s, but yes, certainly he has had a lot of responsibilities
Yeah.
since around the early to mid '70s.
But every highway, it's his.
Yes.
Every bridge is his.
got his mark on it,
Right.
and to our benefit.
Right.
And I think this is something where I was privileged to work for State Highway in public relations and marketing twice. Enjoyed both terms of service. Wonderful people. I think that they're grossly underappreciated.
Yeah.
And it's just because people take them for granted and what they do. The
Yeah.
snowstorm we just experienced. I know what those folks
Right.
are going through.
Right.
And they're quiet heroes.
And now you're doing you're working with the Community Foundation, so you're in again, another public service kind of thing.
Absolutely, and it's such a privilege. I love the Community Foundation. I don't think there's any.
It's basically our community bank.
It is well.
Yeah.
It's actually something. It is forever. The whole concept is that we're able to support charitable giving permanently.
Yeah.
When we through endowment grants, and by endowment giving, mean that when you give a gift to the Community Foundation, it is then going to be preserved, and it is going to produce grants literally forever.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing, and the relationship, the Community Foundation is now in its 32nd year.
Yeah.
Started from scratch by some very visionary people right here in
Well, I remember when Lucy Moeller was the first executive director, and people were like, this thing isn't going to take off.
and it certainly has. Give you
Yeah.
an example, but they've had wonderful leadership and wonderful support through a evolution of board of directors,
Yeah.
and mainly the support of donors
Yeah.
that started in Salisbury.
People who get it.
But over the 31 years,
Yeah.
it is now the largest source of charitable giving on the lower Eastern Shore for the counties of Wycomico, Somerset, and Worcester.
Yeah, that footprint in Worcester is much bigger now.
And it's about meeting needs.
Yeah.
Just last year alone, the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore gave out $5 million in grants to 500 nonprofit organizations.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's across the whole spectrum of charitable needs. Rather, you're talking about basic human needs, youth and education.
Yeah.
If you're talking about arts, if you're talking about the many causes and charities that are served by our faith-based community.
Right. And some innovative programs through education.
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
A lot of time the seed money for
Yeah,
a
there's
lot
like
of
you're taking a
things,
chance a little bit. Yeah.
the seed money often
Yeah.
comes from the Community Foundation. And the Community Foundation supports giving that anyone can do at any time. Everyone has either time or talent or some treasure
Right.
that they can give. And everyone has time or talent if they're really honest with themselves. And we are in a very charitable area.
Right.
The second largest community foundation in the state of Maryland is here on the Lower Shore. This is certainly not where the second largest
No.
concentration of wealth
Right.
at all. But it's because people here have historically and continue to care about each other, rather than they know each other or not.
Yeah.
And I think that makes all the difference. And people who there's only two kind of people who live on the Eastern Shore. One are those of us who were lucky enough to born here, and those of us who were smart enough to move here.
Right.
That's it. Anybody who that doesn't appreciate the quality of life, I feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
But if you're here, there is also, I think, the obligation and the opportunity to give back to your community. And that's what I love about the Community Foundation. It's the whole spectrum of charitable needs is met day in and day out, year after year. And the working relationships, it's with all the nonprofit organizations on the Lower Shore. There is a mutual working relationship. There is an understanding that we want to get the most out of the volunteers through their generous service, through the services that are provided, and to make sure that the grant money is spent and getting as much bang for the buck
Right.
as all of us working together can possibly do.
Right. It's a terrific thing.
The basic, you might say, thing we say about the Community Foundation is that our number one job is to connect people who care with causes that matter.
Right.
So the causes are out there. the relationships with the nonprofits are out there. So when someone comes to the Community Foundation and we talk about charitable giving, our primary job is to identify the causes they care about. Now maybe it's just one thing, but most people have more than one.
Right.
It doesn't matter. We can meet those charitable needs in a number of ways. And the thing is, it leaves a legacy for that person. Long after they're gone,
Right.
they will still be benefiting the community. And here's another thing I don't think people probably realize, is that it's not just individuals. It's also, organizations, civic
Right.
organizations, faith-based groups, and businesses. Sometimes it's families.
Right.
Some of these families have wonderful legacies that will remain forever because they all did their part.
Right.
But even a single individual can leave a lasting legacy through helping others here in our backyard.
Well, your service there is great, and it's a perfect thing for you at this stage of your career in your life. So that's
Absolutely.
terrific.
A tremendous amount of satisfaction.
Now, Berlin.
Yes.
Okay. My father's family from Ironshire moved to Ocean City. My mother's family from Snow Hill and Berlin moved to Ocean City. Growing up, we used to make fun of Berlin. It was like the butt of all the jokes. And I've wrote a column about this years ago. When we used to go to the Acme in Berlin, any excuse to go to Berlin, I was happier in Berlin than I was in Ocean City. I liked Berlin, and I was ashamed that I liked Berlin so much, but I had this secret love affair with Berlin.
But you were what you call early discoverer.
I loved going to Rains. I loved the treasure chest. I loved going to the farm store there, whatever it is.
Yes, it was Southern States.
In Southern States.
Yeah.
I loved everything. I just loved Berlin. I loved the little library. I loved the firehouse. So I loved Berlin. And it wasn't cool to love Berlin then.
Oh no. I don't even think we had that word in our vocabulary
The trains
for
running
a
through
long
town.
time.
I loved everything about it. Now Berlin is so cool. How did that happen? What happened to Berlin?
It didn't happen overnight, but I do think that, remember earlier we were talking about sometimes you have to lose something to really appreciate it.
Right.
And I think that's true in all phases of life. I think that sometimes members of the family, people that you work with professionally, educators, and even a community sometimes has to lose those things that are special to it
Right.
to realize what they have lost. That's what happened to Berlin. Berlin, like most small communities in America, was a pretty thriving community
Right.
in every respect up until the Great Depression. And in 1929 and by the early 30s, it had really hit. Berlin never really recovered from the Great Depression.
Really?
It had been the commercial hub
Yeah.
of this area, second only to Salisbury prior to that time.
Wow.
Something that's been forgotten,
Yeah.
but that's fine. What many communities did is that we went through and there was a lot of caring, a lot of people who wanted to, but how do you reinvent yourself when the world is changing? And I think the first thing that happened, and it really started, the conversation was open in the 70s, and we had what I call Berlin's near-death experience. The population, when America was thriving and growing, particularly in the late 50s all the way through the early 70s, the population of all this country was growing. Number of businesses were growing, jobs were growing. In Berlin, everything was going down, including the permanent population.
Right.
It startled people. And finally they realized, okay, the biggest single decision, and it was multiple community meetings. It wasn't formal council meeting, it was just getting people together
Right.
wherever they could, schools, public places. The first decision they had to make was, are we going to change or are we going to die? That's the most important thing, and I respect so much because I was there to witness it as a newspaper man.
Right.
The conversations, we had great guidance from people in Frederick, Maryland, who were about 5 to 7 years ahead, and they talked about this thing called revitalization.
Yeah.
And like many places in the 20th century, particularly the mid to later 20th century, they were covering over anything that was old. Anything prior to World War II was considered ancient.
Right.
So things were being covered in formstone and buildings and tin and painted over. And the character and of the community was literally disappearing. In our case, thank goodness,
Right.
We didn't lose hardly any buildings, just a very few.
Right.
And we mourned the few we lost, but generally speaking, we realized by talking to the folks that came down from Frederick, from talking to each other, that behind this facade of so-called 20th century modern
Right.
architecture, behind it was true beauty, lasting beauty. And the Renaissance Plaza was developed by Jim Barrett,
Right.
county commissioner, tremendous civic
Right.
leader, and not just political leader, but civic leader in our community, and Bill Freeman, who owned the Treasure Chest.
Right.
And they took an old building in downtown, right across from the bank, and put a significant amount of money in it, bringing it back to its glory of the turn of the previous century, from the 19th century
Right.
to the 20th. And people literally stood on the street. This is not a myth, because I was there as a newspaper man to interview the people and take pictures of the building, and people were catcalling
Right.
both of them and saying, Bill, Jim, we hope you enjoyed having money when you had it, because you're going to lose everything.
Right.
Because at that time, and we're talking around 1980 or early 80s, investing in Berlin was just not done.
Right.
If you had any money to invest, you invested it
You went to the beach.
on the beach. And it worked, and of course it
Yeah.
made sense. But they were pioneers. And within 6 months, they weren't broke. 6 months later, every store on the first floor, I think there was 4 or 5, and every apartment on the second
Right.
floor,
There were apartments upstairs, which was innovative at the time.
within 6 months, everything was filled.
Yeah.
And very shortly, they were making money. There is nothing that gets imitated faster than success.
Right.
It is because of the Renaissance Plaza that many other astute business people and people who cared about the town.
Well, then the Who's Who jumped in and did the Atlantic Hotel.
Hotel.
Right.
Exactly, including the Barrett
You
family.
get a Buddy Jenkins and Ed
Yeah,
Hammond and the Eshams and those guys
and
who
quite
have
frankly-
money.
and we're still thankful to this day.
Yeah.
In fact, last year we honored all those families.
Yeah.
Either the individuals who are still with us, which is most of them, or their descendants, to just say thank you. And I'm telling you that it means a lot to them. I don't know what kind of return on investment they've had, but the return on the emotional.
They did the right thing.
And it is that kind of was the tipping point.
Save the town.
But I think the key here is we went back to our roots.
Yeah.
We decided what was it we had that made Berlin unique, and we realized that because the town burned down 3 times within about 10 years,
Right.
between 1895 and 1906, we lost the entire downtown. It had to be wooden. Now, can you imagine the audacity of the mayor and council at that time,
Right.
in the late 1800s, saying to property owners, you can only rebuild if you rebuild in brick. And you know what they said. What's government doing telling us to do with our
And
private
brick
property?
around here costs a lot of money. you
Oh,
know.
my. Yeah. But again, it's that
Yeah.
same old argument.
Yeah.
Government shouldn't be telling us how to deal with our
Yeah.
private property. But they stood their ground, and that's why most of the architecture downtown, well, at least 80%,
Right.
is from the same period,
Right.
because it was rebuilt within about a 10-year period. Thank goodness, just before that style of architecture just went out of style.
One of my architect friends pointed this out recently, and I didn't even notice it, that the inventory there is amazing because you have Federal and Revival and Victorian, and it's rare in a town like that to have so many samples of each kind.
Yes, yes, and the Victorian is the most notable because
Right.
it's but it goes all the way back to the Federal period.
Yeah.
When you talk about like the Mary Sherwood plantation, and there's just
Yeah.
examples in almost every way you turn. And the neat thing is that this was all done through the encouragement and support of the local town government, but it was the investment of private individuals,
Yeah.
the investment of nonprofits, the investment of families and of businesses who believed that we could be something better.
Yeah, Jim Barrett's a guy I grew up around, and I never would have thought of him as a visionary. In fact, I laugh when I was over getting my eyes done recently next to Lane General Hospital, and the building there is named after him. I was like, Jim Barrett would never have imagined ever that they would name a highway after him and a building.
No.
But
I'm
in the
sure he's
end, he
surprised.
was a visionary.
Yes, and and this is the thing. There are a lot of people in a community who, if you give them encouragement and you give them the support, have wonderful ideas. You can't just keep doing the same old thing and expecting different results.
Yeah.
Some people define that as insanity. I certainly find it totally useless. And, it doesn't mean that every new idea should be embraced, but you have to decide what kind of community you want to be. What are your values? And I think that's the other part of this. Berlin has very strong traditional American values.
Yeah.
And we embrace diversity. We embrace people that come from all over. We certainly are proud that the old families, and I have to say my family's not one of the oldest, but
Right.
it goes back at over 100 years in Berlin.
There's a lot of Williams in Berlin.
Yeah, well,
There's a William Street in Berlin.
but that's based on William Stevenson,
Yeah,
the
but
first
still.
name, and who's
Yeah.
the founder of the Stevenson Methodist Church.
Yeah.
But in any case, the idea is that the old families have embraced the newcomers because we share similar values. We don't care, and I have to say this with all due respect, is that in Berlin, as long as you're, not annoying someone,
Right.
and you're not breaking the law, we'll tolerate just about anything except intolerance.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
a
mean
good point. I hadn't thought of it. I was at the Watch Street Pub in Easton one time, and there was some locals there, and there was someone who had just moved into town. You could hear them talking there at the bar. It's like, yeah, we just bought the house, so-and-so's house, and the people were like, oh. And if you go to Berlin now, like, hey, we just moved here, and the people would be like, welcome. The locals that are at the bar at the Atlantic Hotel, welcome to Berlin. It's a whole different
Yes.
feeling about that.
About 8 years ago, we had a meeting when I was first, in fact, I was the interim mayor, and I noticed that we were starting to have some vacancies downtown. So I called business people and anybody who was interested. You didn't have to own property, just if you cared. And we talked about what could we do. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was I asked people, I said, please stop worrying about if your neighbor's making $50 more today than you did, or if they made $10 more, or if they had 4 more customers.
Yeah.
I said, from now on, let's think about and let's try. I got tremendous support from this. It wasn't a hard sell. I said, let's support each other. When somebody comes into your place of business and they can't find what they're looking for, then maybe please suggest
Right.
somewhere else in town they can go. And if there's no place in town, then tell them the nearest place they can. And it just, everybody started to say, yeah, that makes sense. Now, here was the hook, is I said, at the end of the meeting, folks, just think, all of you and at that time there was about 35 businesses.
Yeah.
Now we have almost 70
Right.
in the same exact area. And it came from cooperation and supporting each other. The way I express this is that everyone became a concierge. Every business became a concierge for every other business in town. The neat thing is, I said, now, folks, if you're looking for self-interest here, just think about it. All of you have now picked up at least 35 more folks to promote your business,
Right.
and you're not paying one more dime.
That's a great point.
In fact, the ones that jumped on it, they could see an immediate return. And everyone who's there now, I believe every business that's there now, it believes in that philosophy and practices it, fervently.
Yeah.
The few businesses that scoffed, they're not there anymore.
What would John Howard Burbage say now if he came back to Berlin? You think it's what he thought it would be?
I don't think any of us could have seen
Yeah.
this. And I think he would be very pleased.
Yeah.
He cared about Berlin. And he was a character of his own sort. But believe me, it had to be much harder to be the mayor of Berlin back when when the wind was not at your back.
Right.
And he hung in there and he fought for that
Oh,
town.
his store, the Style Guide,
Yeah,
was
yeah,
the
yeah.
best place ever.
I have great admiration for that whole generation.
Yeah.
They didn't give up. And it's our obligation to take the community as far as we can into the 21st century, but we are all temporary trustees of our communities.
I remember when I was 8 or 9, my parents were building a house, and they decided to build in Ocean City. And I said, why don't we build a house in Berlin? Because I love Berlin. And my father said, well, the mayor of Berlin doesn't even live in Berlin. And that was true. John Howard Burbage lived in Salisbury.
That's right,
It was like
that's
a big secret that he lived in Salisbury.
Well, very well, not very well kept secret.
Right. And then there was the accusation about him living in Salisbury. And then he slept in the window of his
Yes.
store and made national news. I
National
remember
news.
that.
So in a way, he was a little ahead of his time. Maybe it was in a very unconventional way of getting publicity, but in some ways, any publicity is better than none.
Right.
And Berlin went from having none for a long time to having something unique and very uncommon. And the cool thing is, everybody said, "Hey, we're not ashamed.
Right.
we're Berlin. We're a little different. And you know, I think every small community, particularly here, I don't know about the whole country.
Yeah.
This country is too big and too diverse. But here on the Eastern Shore, so many other communities can make their own brand, can decide what's important to them. I know that we're working very closely, and it's at the beginning, but we're enthusiastically supporting the future course of Snow Hill.
Right.
They have this wonderful river with all these wonderful things. We very much support and feel like, as we're trying to be good partners with our friends in Ocean City, we have many days we have a lot of people and guests in Berlin in the fall and spring that can compete or exceed the number in Ocean City. So if those folks come to our town in the spring and fall, that can only help them, because quite frankly, we're not into building a lot of hotels and motels.
Right.
We have a couple beautiful bed and breakfast. We have the Atlantic Hotel. But if people want to come to Berlin and they don't live in the area, we encourage them to stay overnight in Ocean City or one of the other nearby communities.
Right.
The other thing that I think is appropriate to mention regarding that is that we have a small town and we support, I think, what is now 11 places where you can get food and beverages within like a 3-block area.
Right.
And it's not all Main Street, but the side streets. How are we able to do that? Well, it's not because people in Berlin eat and consume more than any people in the United States. Not at all. But we have so many people that visit our town.
Yeah.
And two things that are big economic drivers in our community are healthcare, and that became possible because of Atlantic General Hospital and all the benefits that come from that, and also now the growing presence of PRMC in our footprint. So healthcare has gone from being something that was grossly underserved to something that is state of the art and very deeply community involved. The other part is tourism. This is the neat thing. Tourism may be our #1 economic driver for the last several years, but we don't have one damn tourist. But we have a hell of a lot of guests.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And this is something I think is part of our DNA, is that when people come to our town, we always talk about this openly. When you have a guest at your home, don't you kind of fluff up the pillows and make sure everything's straight? And well, I believe that our town tries to be in hospitality mode every day. So when people come to our town, they are welcomed not as tourists, but as guests. And I think that encourages people to come back and tell their friends. And hopefully, I believe for the foreseeable future, that will be the approach we'll take to the future of our town.
Well, G. Williams, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud of your town. I love Berlin, and I love your career. Well, I've enjoyed reading you since I could read, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Greg Bassett, another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and 1-on-1. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.